My name is Waverly Wilson. I am 32 years old. And on the morning of my wedding, I stood in front of a mirror, deciding whether to cover the black eye my mother gave me. 140 guests were already driving toward the venue. And in my bag sat an envelope that could end 3 families' worth of silence. I had been a nurse for 10 years. I had charted bruises like this one on other women more times than I could count. I had just never charted my own. My mother taught me one beauty rule when I was 16 years old. You'll hear it later, and when you do, you'll understand everything about my family. What my fiancé said when he finally saw my face, and what I did in the 60 seconds after he said it is the part nobody in that room will ever forget. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where family secrets finally get told out loud and quiet people stop being quiet. If stories about standing up for yourself keep you company on long drives and slow evenings, drop a comment below, and be sure to subscribe. The bridal suite at the Cedar Loft smelled like eucalyptus and hairspray. Somebody had draped my dress over a standing mirror. $1,100 of ivory silk waiting for a bride who was staring at her own face instead. My best friend Jody stood with her back against the door like a bouncer. She's a nurse, too. She works my shifts, drinks my coffee, and knows what my silences mean. The makeup artist, a sweet woman named Donna, kept glancing between my left eye and her kit. She held up a slim green stick, the kind professionals use for color correcting. Green cancels red. That's the theory. Layer green over a bruise, add foundation, add powder, and a camera will never know. Donna had done 100 weddings. She said very gently that she could make it disappear in 15 minutes, that nobody would see a thing. And I stood there in a white robe with my hair half pinned, looking at a purple and red halo blooming around my eye socket. The kind of bruise I had documented on other women 100 times under fluorescent light. 6 to 12 hours old, I thought automatically, consistent with blunt force. Patient is oriented and calm. The room downstairs was filling with folding chairs and string music. And my mother was somewhere in that building wearing champagne-colored lace and greeting people like a queen at her own coronation. To explain why I told Donna to go home, why I walked down those stairs with my face exactly as it was, I have to take you back 13 years to the house on Beaches Street, where I learned that love and weather were the same thing. You checked the sky before you spoke. My mother's house was the cleanest house in Hollis Creek, Ohio. People said that like a compliment. The windows got washed every second Saturday. The porch got swept every evening. And the hedges stood in a line straight enough to grade papers against. Inside, the rules were just as trimmed. Shoes off at the door, voices low, company smiles for company always. My mother, Lorraine Wilson, ran the women's ministry at First Grace and baked for every fundraiser within 20 miles. And I grew up watching strangers adore her from the pew behind. What the strangers never saw was the barometer. That's the best word I have for it. Some houses have moods. Ours had weather fronts, and my mother was the sky. A dropped fork on a bad day could turn the kitchen dark by supper. My father Roy was a gentleman who fixed furnaces for a living and believed his whole job at home was keeping the sky clear. When I was 8, he crouched down to my level in the garage, smelling like machine oil and peppermints, and gave me the only life advice he ever repeated. Don't upset your mother. He said it like he was handing me a badge, like we were partners on the same quiet shift. I wore that badge for 20 years. And here's the part one needs you to understand about houses like ours. The punishments never happened in the yard, or at church, or anywhere a neighbor might glance over. They happened in the kitchen with the curtains drawn, in the hallway after the guests pulled out of the driveway. The cleanest house in town knew exactly where its walls stopped being windows. Nothing about that was an accident. It was policy. By 14, I could read my mother's barometric pressure from across a room. The jaw was the first gauge, then the sound of cabinet doors. There is a difference between a shut and a close, and I could hear it from upstairs through a closed bedroom door. I learned to move dishes before they became evidence. To change subjects the way other kids change channels, to put myself between my mother's mood and whoever was about to trip its wire. I got good at it. I got so good it stopped feeling like fear and started feeling like a skill. Like something I was simply the best at, the way some girls were the best at piano. Years later, a hospital would pay me for that exact talent. Emergency rooms run on people who can walk into a screaming room and lower its temperature with their voice, who can watch a monitor and a family's faces at the same time, who never ever startle. Every charge nurse I know grew up somewhere. I grew up on Beaches Street. My therapist would eventually put language on it. Hypervigilance, overfunctioning, a childhood spent on shift. But at 14, I only knew that the house stayed calmer when I worked, and that its calm was my report card. If supper went quiet and nobody's chair scraped back hard, I had done my job. There was exactly one person who looked at our spotless windows and saw straight through the glass. My Aunt Karen, my mother's younger sister, the dental hygienist from Columbus, with the loud laugh and the terrible habit of asking questions in front of everyone. My mother hated her the way you hate a smoke detector. It never lies. It just goes off. The night it first crossed a line I can point to. I was 16. We had company, a deacon and his wife, and I contradicted my mother at the table over something so small I'm embarrassed to say it. A date, I think, the year we'd taken a trip to Lake Erie. The guests laughed. My mother laughed, too. The company laughed and topped off everyone's iced tea. She waited until the tail lights cleared the hedges. The slap came in the kitchen fast and flat, and the ring she wore caught me under the cheekbone hard enough to leave a mark that would still be there Monday. But that's not the part that stayed with me. And this is the part that still catches in my throat. I filed that morning under tenderness, her hands in my hair, her voice low and patient, teaching me something useful. It took me half a lifetime and 14 months of therapy to see the lesson for what it was. She wasn't covering a bruise. She was training her successor. I was 19 the night I fell down the stairs. I'm going to leave the details of the argument where they belong in that house and tell you what matters. I ended up in the Hollis Creek Regional Emergency Room needing 4 stitches above my hairline, with my mother in the waiting room telling the intake clerk what a klutz I'd always been. The nurse who cleaned me up was in her 50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain. She looked at the wound longer than she needed to. Then she pulled the curtain, sat on the wheeled stool, and asked me quietly, with the door of the question left all the way open, how it happened at home tonight. I still think about the kindness and how she built that sentence. And through the gap in the curtain, I could see my mother watching me, and my mother smiled the company smile. And later in the car, she said the words that were our family's whole constitution, the ones I'd heard after every drawn curtain and every swept porch. What happens in this house stays in this house. So I told the nurse the stairs story. She wrote it down and I watched her not believe it, and I understood that we were both following procedure. 6 weeks later I packed 2 duffel bags while my mother was at choir practice, left a note that said I'd call, and moved into a room above a laundromat, with a hot plate, and a lock I paid for myself. I thought leaving was the same thing as escaping. It took me 13 years to learn the difference. And I paid the last installment of that tuition in a wedding dress. Here is what I did with the next decade. Because I need you to know I wasn't hiding in that room over the laundromat. I worked registration at the hospital by day and finished prerequisites at night. And I put myself through nursing school without borrowing $1 from anyone whose last name I shared. Bachelor's at 22, emergency department at 24, the same ER where a nurse once looked at my stitches too long, which is either irony or a homing instinct. And I've stopped pretending to know which. By 30, I was a charge nurse running night shifts, the one they call when a patient starts swinging or a family starts collapsing. I had my own apartment on the east side of Hollis Creek, 15 minutes, and a whole world away from Beaches Street. I had a paid-off Honda, $23,000 in savings, and a peace lie I kept alive out of spite. My mother and I settled into a treaty neither of us ever signed out loud. Christmas dinner at a restaurant, her birthday lunch at a different restaurant, always public places, always my own car in the lot, always an exit. She played the part of a mother whose daughter was busy. I played the part of a daughter who was busy. It worked the way a fence works. And yes, in the bottom of my work bag, under the spare stethoscope and the granola bars, I still carried a mint green corrector stick. I hadn't needed it in years. I kept it the way some people keep an umbrella in a drought. Old habits, I told myself on the rare mornings I noticed it rolling around in there. A nurse should be honest, so I'll be honest. It wasn't a habit. It was a forecast. I met Grant Mercer at a hospital fundraiser 3 years ago over a silent auction table where we were the only two people bidding on a gas grill. He was 31 then, a commercial loan officer at Mercer & Sons, the bank his grandfather founded, and he had the calmest hands I'd ever watched sign a check. That sounds like a strange thing to notice. Understand that I had spent my whole life reading Rooms for Turbulence, and Grant read like a cloudless week. He opened doors, remembered my coffee order, showed up when he said he would, down to the minute. Steady as a signature, my friend Jody said. And for a woman raised on weather, steady felt like the whole point of the sky. If I'm honest with you, and I promised I would be, the flags were there early, small and neatly folded. At a dinner with his bank clients, he squeezed my hand under the table when I started a story about work. Later he said the word gross, then the word optics, then kissed my forehead like punctuation. He liked my hair one way. He introduced me as a nurse at Regional, never as a charge nurse, because he said titles sounded like bragging when a wife said them. I noticed every one of those folds. I want that on the record. I noticed and I filed them under the cost of doing business with a good man from a careful family because his careful family looked so much like the opposite of mine. 2 years in, he proposed at his parents' lake house with a ring that had belonged to his grandmother. And Grant wanted a real wedding. A family wedding. And a family wedding meant my mother. The engagement dinner was at the Mercer's Club. 2 long families at one long table, and my mother arrived in pearl earrings carrying a lemon pound cake she just threw together. I watched her work that room the way surgeons watch a resident, with professional dread and reluctant awe. She remembered the names of Grant's cousins' children. She quoted the same 2 verses Harold Mercer, Grant's father, liked to quote. By dessert, Grant's mother was holding my mother's hand and calling her a treasure. And Lorraine Wilson had a new congregation. On the drive home, Grant said, "Isn't she wonderful?" And I said, "She's very good at dinners." And he laughed like I'd made a joke instead of filed a report. Within a month, the wonderful woman had a seat at every wedding decision because the 2 families kept braiding themselves together in ways I couldn't politely unbraid. The venue was the clearest example. The Cedar Loft, a renovated barn 20 minutes outside town, normally booked 18 months out and priced like a small house. But the owner's mother sat in my mother's Bible study, and suddenly, there was a cancellation in June, and a family discount arranged by Lorraine announced at Sunday dinner in front of both families like a dove being released. Everyone applauded. Try at that table saying you'd rather pay full price somewhere else. Try explaining that a discount can be a leash. There is no sentence for that which doesn't sound insane. And my mother knew it because engineering rooms, where the truth sounds insane, was her life's work. So I said, "Thank you." The trap didn't slam. Traps like her never slam. It clicked shut so softly, so warmly that everyone in the room heard it as a door being opened. The guest list happened at my mother's kitchen table, which should have told me everything about who was marrying whom. She had printouts. She had a seating chart already sketched in pencil. Church friends clustered like states on a map. I wrote my list on an index card, and the first name on it above my charge team was Karen Hale.